Guys, we are missing the heck out of you. I just wanted to let you know social media is so important right now. It's just one of the many ways that we're able to connect with you, but we need you guys to engage back with us for us to be able to connect with you. So if you're not following us already, follow us at Embassy HS. We changed that over. Hopefully you guys saw that. Guys, also just want to let you know that our mission trip is still on. That's still a thing that's happening. So we have to have all those signups by the end of May. So hopefully you guys are signing up for that. We'll put that in the link down below. Guys, this is weird. We're doing this YouTube thing, but we're excited about it, and we hope you are too. We're going to have the small group questions in the description below also, and we're also going to be commenting on the sides with you guys. So if you get, there'll be like a little chat box, and you can talk throughout there. Guys, we want to talk to you. Text me or Shane, DM us, whatever you guys want to do. FaceTime us. We want to connect with you guys. We miss you. We love you. Stay safe.
Easter, a time for fake grass, plastic eggs, these things, chocolate bunnies, and people dressed as bunnies. And then there are the weird parts of Easter, like fake grass, plastic eggs, these things, chocolate bunnies, and people dressed as bunnies, which is interesting. But what does all this stuff have to do with Easter? And if this holiday is about more than candy and wearing uncomfortable clothes to church and lunch with your relatives, what makes Easter happy?
Happy Easter, Embassy Student Ministry. This is not how we intended to start this series. We were hoping to have you guys in the room with us and to serve you food and semi-good coffee, and that we would all get to be together, but obviously that's not happening right now. So we're thankful that we live in an age of technology, that we're able to have Embassy YouTube premiere parties, and we hope that you're joining in with us in that. We want you to know that just because we're socially distanced right now does not mean that we have to be relationally distanced. So if there are things that you guys need to talk about, if you have some fears or anxiety during this weird, funky time, like please reach out to Jake or myself or your small group leader. Let's talk about that. You know, we can have a social distanced coffee meeting if we need to. We can go grab a socially distanced lunch. We can FaceTime, like whatever you guys need, whatever works best. Please don't let us be separated from you in this time of social distancing. We love you guys, and we miss you, and we're excited to see you again. Now, you may be a little bit curious as to why I opened the message here by saying Happy Easter. If you've been to Walmart or to Target or any of the grocery stores stocking up on toilet paper and, canned goods and all that stuff, one thing that you may have noticed is that Easter decorations have already been out for a while. Like February 15th, it was like Easter Sunday already. It's like we got like 2 months to Easter, right? Because we can't just let like one holiday be without promoting the next holiday. Now, I don't know how you grew up, but for me, Easter was always kind of like a happy and fun time. And I think that for the most part, we'd all agree that Easter is happy, right? You're allowed to eat an unreal amount of candy. Lots of people would argue that Reese's peanut butter eggs is like the best Easter candy, and those people would be wrong. You see, there's these thing called Starburst jelly beans that come out around Easter time, and that is the best Easter candy. You get to eat a lot of candy, and people wear these like weird pastel colors, like light blues and pinks and greens, and it's like, why is this a color that we wear around this time? So I decided to rebel against that today and just wear like a black shirt because I'm rebellious like that. So pastels are like happy and candy is happy. We color eggs, which is just like this weird practice, right? You just like hard boil these eggs and then you dip them in dye and then they're colored, and it's like, this is cool and great and nice. And then if that's not weird enough, then we take them and we like hide them all over our yards and our houses, and we expect our little children to run around and find them. I don't know, it's kind of strange to me, but for some reason this is happy. And perhaps the most weird happy thing about Easter is parents forcing their children to take pictures with a giant bunny. Now, I don't know about you guys or what your experience with the giant Easter bunny was, but I know that there are a lot of parents who did not have a great experience with their children and the giant Easter bunny. Take a look at some of these images and you'll see what I'm talking about, right? And all of this permanently traumatizing their children just for the sake of an Instagram post. Now, in this series, we're going to talk about some of the reasons why Easter is such a big deal, particularly for people who are followers of Jesus like you and I. We're going to be talking about how we were growing up and maybe we wondered why Easter is even a thing. And so in this series, we're going to talk not only about what we celebrate at Easter, but also why that can and should make us happy. And I think that we should be happy for more than just a lot of candy and a lot of pastel colors and weirdly dyed Easter eggs. So if you think back to those pictures that I was showing you a couple minutes ago, those children were not happy at all. In fact, the better word for those kids and their reaction is not happy, but scared. And even though your parents, I hope, probably aren't going to make you dress up and sit on the lap of a giant Easter bunny, you and I think, all know the feeling of being scared. We all know that fear can take away our happiness faster than just about anything. And if we're real and we're honest with ourselves, I think we would all agree that fear is something that we've been struggling with our entire lives. Now, when we were kids, the fear was, somewhat irrational, kind of like the kids being placed on the lap of a giant bunny, or thinking that there was monsters under the bed or in the closet that were going to come out at night. Maybe our fear as a little kid was breaking or losing a favorite toy, or being in the dark, or getting hurt and having to miss out on the fun. Fear can wreck our sense of peace and happiness, even as a little kid. But as you grow older, your fears likely transferred and currently are transferring to other things like failing classes and being rejected by friends, or maybe it's doing something embarrassing that gets caught on camera and is posted on social media for the world to see. Maybe it's not making a team. Maybe it's having your team's season canceled by COVID-19. Maybe it's attempting to talk to someone that you had a crush on and getting rejected. I know that was a big fear for me. I have stories, but I'm going to save those for a later time. You can ask me. Fear looked different when you were little, sure, but the feeling was still very real. And, well, now you're in high school, and you've probably figured out that you just don't grow out of fear. As you grow up, fear just grows up with you. Maybe you don't call it fear, maybe you call it stress, maybe you call it anxiety, maybe you call it being worried, but no matter what you call it, you probably fear something. All of us do. For you, maybe it's the fear of not fitting in, not getting the right GPA, or getting into the college that you want to go to. Maybe your fear is about your health, the health of your relationships, or the health of people that you love. Maybe it's fear of the future, of not really amounting to much of anything, or not really having any real significance in your life. Whatever your particular fear is, you don't need me to tell you that fear is very, very real. And the reality is that fear is on the rise. I think that the time that we're living in is a perfect example of the reality of fear, not just for little kids or for middle schoolers or for high schoolers, but everybody across the board is living right now in fear. In fact, chances are good that in this room right now, or in your rooms right now, in your screens, fear is determining the direction of lots of our lives. Look at the empty shelves all over the grocery stores, all over town. Fear determines the direction of a lot of our lives. We make decisions to do or not do certain things based off of fear. We avoid people and conversations that need to happen because they freak us out. We're numbing ourselves for hours on our phones and on our screens because we don't want to acknowledge the feelings of stress and fear that we have inside of us. Whether you realize it or not, fear is fueling a lot of your thoughts and actions. And here's what's really, really interesting about all of this. If we boil it down, the one thing that fear connects to all of our fears is the fear of death. Now you may be thinking, wow, this is supposed to be like Happy Easter, right? That just took a really, really dark turn, Shane. I'm afraid of getting a bad grade in history, and that is because I'm afraid of dying. I'm not sure how the two connect. But I'm not just talking about physical death here. I'm talking about the end of something. For example, think about it in relationship to something or some of the fears that you maybe have right now. We're afraid of really and truly being ourselves because we think that if people knew the real us, they'd freak out, they would run for their lives, and their friendships with us would end. Their interest in being our friend would be over, would be dead. We're afraid of not getting into the college of our dreams because if our application gets rejected, that dream dies. We're afraid of getting busted or found out when it comes to some of the secretive stuff in our lives because that would mean other people's perfect image of us would have to die. So whether it's physical death or the death of something that we hope for, the fear of death comes down to losing something we think we'll never get back. And when you think of it that way, it's easy to connect almost all of our fears back to a fear of death. See, death seems final. It's like fear's knockout punch that gives it victory. So if our fears come true and a friendship ends, a goal isn't reached, or a dream dies, and we get to the end of our lives and realize that death defeats us once and for all, that's just flat out devastating. There's no hope in that at all. There's nothing happy about that. But friends, this is exactly where the Easter story comes in, right in the middle of our fear of death. So, as we head into this Easter season, you may have heard that the point of the whole holiday isn't actually about eggs or bunnies or chocolate or terrified pictures. For those of us who follow Jesus, this is the time of year when we celebrate how Jesus came to earth, died on a cross as a criminal, and then unexpectedly, 3 days later, rose from the dead. That is what makes Easter a big deal. It changes everything, and it especially changed the life of a guy named Paul. Now, Paul is one of the most famous Christians in all of history. Before he became a Jesus follower, this guy Paul, he spent years trying to scare Christians into leaving the faith. And when I mean scare Christians, not just like, you should not be a Christian anymore or else something bad's going to happen to you. I mean like Paul killed Christians. And then Paul met Jesus. The dead and then buried and then raised to life, not dead anymore Jesus. And it changed everything. The guy who used to threaten Christians' lives became the greatest missionary of all time. He was shipwrecked and imprisoned and threatened and beaten and bitten by venomous snakes, but he kept going because he was so passionate about people understanding the significance of Jesus' death and resurrection. Paul's life was constantly in danger. In fact, he was even eventually killed for his death. And despite all of that, Paul seemed to live without any fear of death. And in one of Paul's letters, we can see why. Paul writes to the city of Corinth, and in writing to the city of Corinth, he reminds people that Jesus died and came back to life by his own power 3 days later. Paul says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 54 and 55. Death is swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? It's like Paul is taunting the very idea of death by reminding the Corinthian church that on Easter morning, the day that Jesus walked out of the tomb, death lost to Jesus. You see, when Jesus died and rose again, he defeated death. And that means, because of the resurrection, death can no longer defeat us. The power that death has over our relationships, our reputations, our future hopes and dreams, even our physical bodies, is gone, thanks to what Jesus did on Easter. We no longer have to live in fear of any kind of death, physical, relational, emotional, because Jesus destroyed death once and for all. After Jesus was hung on a cross and placed in a tomb, it seemed like humanity's greatest fear had come true. Death was the ultimate thing to fear. To Jesus' closest followers, it seemed like his death was final. The dream was over. But then, 3 days later, Jesus walked out of the tomb alive. And when he did that, he proved that even the power of death wasn't strong enough to overcome the power of Jesus. This is why Paul was able to live the way he did, no longer fearing death. It's why he didn't seem to fear much of anything in his life after he encountered Jesus. He seemed to finally realize that the scariest things aren't the most powerful things. The things we fear don't have the same power that Jesus does. Paul trusted that the fears that he faced were no match for the power of the resurrected Jesus. In other words, Easter means that fear isn't final. And friends, if Jesus can defeat death, he can defeat anything that you are afraid of. Fear will try to convince you that it gets the final word, that at the end of the day, fear wins. Fear will try and convince you that you're not good enough, that you'll never find a purpose, or that your life isn't worth it. Fear will try to make you listen and obey, because that's what power is all about. Here's the truth. Fear is only powerful if it can convince you that it is final. Fear will try to make you believe that nothing is stronger than what you're afraid of. But when Jesus defeated death itself, he showed us that nothing we fear is bigger than Jesus. Nothing we fear is stronger than him. He showed us that fear, no matter what we're afraid of, does not get the final say. Now you may be thinking to yourself, you can't just tell me that because Jesus rose again, I don't have to be afraid of anything, even death. I'm still anxious, I'm still depressed, I'm still terrified of what is ahead in my life. I'm still terrified of what is happening right now in my life. And look, I understand. Even if fear doesn't get the final word, that doesn't mean that there aren't still things to be afraid of. Real things, big things. And it's not a guarantee that something you're afraid of won't happen. But it does mean that you're more equipped to handle those things than you may realize. See, in Paul's letter to the Romans, he says this: the Spirit of God, who raised Jesus from the dead, get this, lives in you. Stop and think about that for a second. Paul is saying that the same power that defeated death 2,000 years ago when Jesus rose from the dead is currently actually inside and living and working through those of us who believe in Jesus today. Maybe that's why Paul seemed to live so free from so many of the fears that we typically face. And maybe if you and I could embrace the significance of Easter in our lives, we can live the way that Paul did too. When you have faith in Jesus, the power that brought Jesus back to life is inside of you as well. And that means that fear doesn't get to tell you what to do. You may have walked in here today, or you may have tuned in here today, controlled by all sorts of different fears. The fact that you have to tune into us here today is in large part because we are being controlled by our fears. We're being wise in social distancing ourselves, but that social distancing comes from fear. Realistic and legitimate fears, but fear nonetheless. But know that if Jesus defeated death, the Spirit of Jesus who defeated death can live in you. Imagine what Jesus' Spirit can do in the face of the things that you're afraid of. Let me ask you this. Where has fear been holding you back? Is it in your relationships? Is it in your dreaming about your future? Is it in going to college, or maybe dealing with something concerning your mental health that you've been afraid to acknowledge? Is it doing something that you know you should do no matter what it does to your reputation? Actually, is it exploring faith in Jesus? Because up to this point, you've been afraid of how your life might change. Wherever fear has been holding you back, with Jesus' help, you can take a step towards facing it. So let me ask you this. What steps should you take to prove that fear no longer has power over you? Maybe a step that you could take is forgiving someone. Maybe a step that you could take is apologizing to someone. Maybe it's talking to your school counselor. Maybe it's seeing a doctor and starting a conversation about your mental wellness. Maybe it's talking to your parents about something that you've never, ever told them. Maybe it's asking your small group leader for help with something that you've been afraid to admit, or picking a new friend group that is better for you. Maybe it's asking the honest questions that you have about Christianity. This Easter, no matter what your step is, you can begin to face your fears because of Jesus. Because of what we celebrate at Easter, what Jesus did for us, fear no longer gets to determine the direction of your life. I don't know what your step is, but I know this. If you're someone who believes that Jesus defeated death and you follow after him, then you have his power inside of you. And because of that, you can handle whatever fear throws at you, no matter how scary it is. Remember, you are not facing fear by yourself. You are relying on the power of the one who defeated your greatest fear once and for all. He took away the power of death. He took away its victory. He took away its sting. And that means that you don't have to worry about anything being more powerful than Jesus. This is the hope that the Christian faith is built on. This is what caused Paul to live free from fear. This is what makes Easter such a happy holiday. And while the rest of the world lives lives controlled by fear, driven by stress, you and I don't have to anymore. We are free. And that is just one reason that we can say, Happy Easter.